can get started. Did anyone need any sound checks or anything? Everyone's getting the audio that they need? We're good that way? Okay. All right, we'll get started here. First, before I get into too much, I just want to introduce a few people up here with me. I've got State's Attorney Birch Burdick over here, as most of you guys recognize. We've got Deputy Coroner Darren Haberlin with the Cass County Coroner's Office. Excuse me, and then I've got Detective Jake Wiedemann with the Cass County Sheriff's Office, and he's kind of the case agent or lead case agent for this case. Excuse me. With that, I just want to simply thank everyone for being patient with us so we could do this press release today at 2. I know there's been some questions from some individuals on why does it take a little bit longer to get this information out. And so I'd just like to take this time to just kind of briefly touch on that. There's a lot of things, of course, as all of you guys know, that go into cases like this, a lot of investigative work. Some of it takes time, excuse me. And also considering different pieces of the case, we of course have the coroner's office who needs to look at certain aspects of the case, and we have the Cass County State's Attorney's Office that needs to look at specific aspects of the case. If we do a press conference right away, then we might not have some of that information available to us, and we certainly don't want to have a series of press conferences. We would rather or prefer to do one and try to encompass as much information as we can and get you guys that information so you have it. So with that, we'll begin here. On October 18th, 2021, at approximately 1:56 a.m., the Cass County Sheriff's Office was dispatched to 15568 37th Street Southeast in Casselton on a report of gunshots. That address is the address of the Club 94 Bar and Grill, which also includes the owner's residence. The address used is a rural 911 address because of its location on the south edge of town. The shooting incident occurred inside the connected residence. The reporting party, later identified as 54-year-old Edwin Charles Kester, Jr., stated to dispatch that he had shot someone. Deputy Justin Phillips, one of our patrol deputies, was at our office in Casselton when that call came in. Our office in Casselton happens to be just across the parking lot from where the incident occurred. Deputy Phillips responded immediately and conducted a safe tactical approach to the residence. Deputy Phillips came into contact with Mr. Kester just outside the north entryway. Mr. Kester was cooperative and was detained in handcuffs for officer safety. As they entered the residence, Deputy Phillips noticed a female inside and an individual lying on the floor, later identified as 58-year-old Randall Ray Burton. At this time, I'm not going to release the name of the female, pending Marcy's law concerns, and you'll understand why in just a few minutes, okay? Once Deputy Phillips determined that the scene was safe, he began to provide life-saving measures on Mr. Burton. Deputy Phillips also at this time noticed that Mr. Burton had sustained gunshot wounds. Deputy Phillips performed life-saving measures until Casselton ambulance arrived. Mr. Burton was eventually transported to a local area hospital where he was pronounced deceased. As we understand, all parties involved in this incident were acquaintances. Prior to Monday's incident on October 14th, 2021, deputies were called to the Club 94 for a disturbance. After investigating the incident, Mr. Burton was arrested for domestic violence and terrorizing of the female involved in Monday morning's incident, along with an unrelated male. Okay. On October 15th, Mr. Burton appeared in court on charges of domestic violence and terrorizing. Mr. Burton pled not guilty. Mr. Burton had bail set with the condition that he would sign a predisposition order prohibiting contact with the victims, to include the female involved in this case. On October 17th, 2021, Mr. Burton was released from custody at the Cass County Jail after his bond was posted. The female involved in this case had mentioned to friends that she was afraid that Mr. Burton may come to her residence at some point. Because of this, she told our investigators that she had changed the locks to her residence and was trying to spend time with friends. On the evening of October 17th and into the early morning hours of October 18th, 2021, when this incident occurred, the female stated that she had friends over to the bar so that she would not be alone. We also learned that Mr. Kester volunteered to stay at her residence so she could get some rest. We now know that sometime around 1:56 a.m., Mr. Burton forced his way into the residence through two locked doors. After forcing his way into the residence, Mr. Burton headed straight towards the female's bedroom. It was at this point that Mr. Kester states that he shot Mr. Burton. Although deputies on scene initially detained Mr. Kester, the decision was made not to arrest him. That decision was made based off of evidence collected and observed at the scene, video evidence viewed and collected, statements provided to this point, and that we did not feel, given the circumstances, that Mr. Kester posed a threat to our community. The case still is active and ongoing, so I have to remind you of that. At this point, we have been unsuccessful in locating any family or next of kin for Mr. Burton. So I would appreciate your help, and you're doing that right now by getting this information out. If anyone could help us on locating someone in that capacity, we would certainly welcome that information. With that, I will turn it over for questions at this point.
Can we get some spellings on Mr. Kester's and Mr. Burton's first and last names?
Yes, so it was 54-year-old Edwin, E-D-W-I-N, middle name of Charles, common spelling. Last name is Kester. It's K as in King, E-S-T-E-R, and Junior. Okay. And then 58-year-old Randell, and it's R-A-N-D-E-L-L, middle name of Ray, R-A-Y, Burton, B-U-R-T-O-N. Did you get that? You got it, April? Okay.
Yep.
All right. With that, then, just remind you, obviously, that it is still an active investigation, because we're still looking at some pieces of evidence and different things. And so we will attempt to answer questions that you have at this point, if you have any. And some we may be able to answer, and some not.
So the home that they were at, that was the female's home?
Yes.
And he made his way through two locked doors. And Kester was staying there with her to
Correct.
make sure that she could sleep that night?
Correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
And her house is connected to Club 94?
Yep, her residence is connected to Club 94. In fact, you can gain entrance or entry into her residence through Club 94.
You mentioned that the owner lived in that residence. Was he at all involved in any of this?
Nope, that was the female.
Oh, the female is the owner.
Yep, the female. Well, yep, the female is the owner of the residence. Yep.
Is it standard practice to detain someone in what might appear to be a self-defense case, even if it might immediately appear to be a pretty clear-cut self-defense situation?
So, I'm not sure at which point you're wondering about the detainment. Nick, but what I could tell you is initially when officers arrive to a crime scene, it is very common practice to detain individuals that they feel are associated with that crime scene, because initially, as you can imagine, when we arrive, we don't know everything that's going on, right? We have to look at pieces of evidence. We have to gather witness statements. In this case, we had some video that we were able to collect. We need to look at all those things before we can make a determination on whether that person is going to be arrested, on whether we can release them. And so, you know, in a scene like this where we've had loss of life, people can be detained for long periods of time until we can determine whether they were associated with the crime. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where did the video come from?
The video came from different pieces. We obviously have body cams now, as you guys know, so that we were able to gather some video from some of the body cam stuff, of course, and then just from area businesses.
At this point, do you know if Burton was armed or anything like that?
What are you wondering if he was armed with? Like a
The knife, a gun?
Okay. Detective Wiedemann, did you guys?
He was
Found it.
located with a folding pocket knife on his person.
How long was Mr. Kester detained for?
Well, in order to give you an accurate time of that, April, I'd have to. I mean, are you
Is
wanting
there
like?
like a-
Are you wanting like down to the minutes or?
No, just like an
Okay.
estimate in hours.
Well, our guys arrived on scene shortly after 1:56. Again, without giving you a specific time to the seconds, it was very close to that time that he was initially detained when Deputy Phillips arrived. And then he was detained until we released the scene, which was approximately
About noon,
noon
Okay.
that same day. So again, approximate.
Was Mr. Kester or the woman injured at all?
There were no reported injuries from anyone besides Mr. Burton.
They did not receive any medical attention or anything at the scene, and nothing that was reported at the time that I was there. So.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what aspects of this are still under investigation? Is there more evidence you're looking for or looking into right now?
Without getting into everything, because it's still active and ongoing, there's obviously pieces of information that have technology associated with them, and there's sometimes pieces of evidence that we collect at scenes that we can't do anything with at the scene because we don't have the technology pieces there to deal with those. So we have to bring them back to our evidence room here, and some of the things we have to send different places, maybe to the crime lab. In this instance, we got to do some technology. There's some technology pieces of evidence that we need to consider in downloading and things like that.
How many shots were fired from Mr. Kester, and what type of firearm was he using at the time?
Darren, do you want to make any comments on the gunshot wounds to the victim or not at this time?
From our perspective, that's still under investigation by the UND Forensics and Pathology following his autopsy. So I'm not at liberty to disclose anything right now.
Detective Wiedemann, what caliber gun was used?
He was using a .38 caliber Taurus revolver.
Obviously no injuries to Mr. Kester or the female, but can you speak to how they're doing today? Obviously this is traumatic.
I can't speak to how they're doing like right now, because I haven't talked with them within the last couple hours. But obviously, very much like you said, Bailey, this was a traumatic incident for them. And so I'm sure there's trauma that's coming along with that. But I can't speak to right at this minute how they're doing. So we have had contact with them because we're still investigating things, so we're still contacting them at different times.
Sheriff, is it accurate to say that Mr. Kester was acting in self-defense?
That part is still enacting in self-defense of himself, or which Which part are you? What are you?
Protection of the woman, how would you summarize that?
So that part's still very much under investigation as to, there's a bunch of different circumstances involving that, so. But as I had mentioned in my statement, the circumstances revolving that, Mr. Burton had made entry into there and had headed towards, as we were told, the female's room, so, and that's when he was engaged.
You said that Mr. Kessler was let go because he didn't post the direct employment?
Yes, we did not feel, given the circumstances, we felt that it was an isolated incident to that particular situation, so we didn't feel that anyone else was in danger.
I understand you kind of already alluded to what the answer might be to this question, but are you guys ruling out possible charges against the roommate, or, well, person who stayed with the woman?
Birch, you want to speak to that at all?
Birch Burdick with the State's Attorney's Office. As the sheriff indicated, the investigation is ongoing. We consulted with the sheriff's office on the continued detaining of Mr. Kester at the time. The sheriff has explained they released him from his temporary detainment. The question you're asking specifically is what?
Are you ruling out potential charges against this person?
Not at this point for this reason. The old expression goes, don't put the cart before the horse. The horse here has got to be the investigation. Facts are always king in our world. So we'd like to see all the facts, and then we'll make a final determination in concert with the sheriff's office. So we'll await an opportunity to look at all those facts. As the sheriff indicated, there are some additional things that are being reviewed by his office and others in support of his office. We'll take a look at all of that together when that's done.
I was just looking briefly at Mr. Burton's record, and he does have a history of terrorizing drugs and violating restraining orders. And it sounds like there's a no contact order signed by him, but was there anything else legally that the judicial system or that law enforcement could have done to protect this woman from him?
That's a good question. I would probably speak more to the law enforcement angle. Certainly, had we known that, which would be almost nearly impossible, that Mr. Burton would go back to the residence, of course we could have done some things different, but we had no way really of knowing that. I mean, no one tipped us off to anything, and there are a number of people that get order of protection put into place on a day-to-day basis, and certainly we would hope that people would abide by those. We know that that doesn't always happen, but we, had we known the, in this case, the female hadn't, we weren't aware that she was afraid that he was going to potentially come back to the residence. Had she let us know that, we might have done extra patrol in the area and done some extra things that way, but we just weren't aware of that piece of information. So certainly if we would have had any of those indications or those pieces of information, we would have done whatever we could to have spent extra time there and checked in and done different things, extra patrol, things of that nature, in order to try to prevent the incident from occurring. But realistically, without being tipped off to that information, I don't see that we could have done anything different. As far as the judicial system, I would maybe refer that back to Birch on that particular question.
So Mr. Burton, was seen by the court last Friday. At that time, he was eligible for some kind of bail. The court tries to take things into account. We would have advised the court of his background and then suggested the bail to the court. The court did set the bail at the amount we requested, which was $10,000 10% cash. So he later in the weekend came up with $1,000 plus what we refer to as a predisposition, meaning prior to the conclusion of the case, order prohibiting contact, which the court ordered, and Mr. Burton signed acknowledging that he had it and had read it, which prevented him from getting within 300 yards of the person who's protected by the order. We all recognize that an order prohibiting contact is a piece of paper. It's not a fence. That said, they are often effective tools, not always effective tools. So our office and the court in particular needs to make a judgment under the circumstances of what might be an appropriate bail. The law contemplates that people be released on personal recognizance without any cash. In this case, he had to come up with $1,000 of cash. The idea on that is to try and make it clear to that person that they need to show up. If there is a public safety concern, the court can consider that as well. As the sheriff indicated, we have lots of orders prohibiting contact that come out of our court. This is something that almost never happens, but it doesn't mean it cannot happen. Again, as the sheriff indicated, if we had insight into people's thinkings and their mindset and their soul, we could make perfect decisions. We make the best decisions we can under the circumstances and recognizing what the law contemplates. In hindsight, it would have been nice to set bail at some very high number that, that was conceivably unreachable. If we felt we had that information that would sustain such a thing, we would have recommended that to the court. But as I indicated, we don't necessarily have that kind of insight. We recommended a bail and a protection order which is consistent with the kind of history that these people have together and that Mr. Burton in particular had.
Are there any other questions or thoughts we could help anyone with? Again, it would be hard for me to give you like a, tomorrow at 5 o'clock type answer because of the technology and some things that we're working through. It's hard to say and how long it would take to get some of those things downloaded. Certainly, in a case like this is a very important case. We had loss of life, and so we want to try to get everything put together as quick as we can. So I think that, and some of the stuff that we have, we'll have to work with some other agencies to get some of that information. And so we'll have to work within their schedules as well, but I think that we would probably, based on the magnitude of the case, maybe push to the forefront a little bit. So.
Sure, this is the second self-defense related gun incident in Casselton within the last year or so. Obviously these are, at this point, they're both self-defense related, but is there anything you have to say tonight to the residents of Casselton just in regards to the gun-related violence incidents that have happened?
Well, certainly we don't want anyone to get hurt in any of our communities. I mean, that's a concern for us. We certainly understand within that realm that people have the right to protect themselves, but how I would simply answer that is if people have a concern or some issue going on that they think could turn into some sort of a violent situation, we would obviously very much recommend and prefer that they contact our office so that we can come out there and assist them and intervene and help in any way that we can. I'm not just in general, and I'm not going to relate it to these two cases, but just in general, we would prefer that that happens rather than people take things into their own hands. But certainly we don't want people to get hurt. And we do understand that there are times where people may need to defend themselves because maybe they don't have time to contact law enforcement. But just on the front end and being preventive, if people have an inclination that there might be an issue brewing or some sort of situation where potentially violence may happen, we would certainly want them to contact our office so that we could help them through that situation and that no one does get hurt. So,
Were there customers or employees inside the club last night?
there was not at the time. I did bring some, and I don't know if you'd be interested in this at all, Bailey, but I did bring some information in reference to Casselton, because I thought someone might have the question as, you know, do we think things are getting more dangerous in Casselton and stuff like that? And so anytime that we have an event like this, we want to look at some crime numbers, some statistics, and see where we may be having some issues in that community, and to see if something was related or something maybe precipitated this. Or if there's anything we can do as an office to prevent those things. We contract police services with the city of Casselton, so we have deputies out there a majority of the time. You know, that doesn't happen everywhere out in Cass County because not everyone has the resources to do that. But the city of Casselton does contract with us, and so we do spend a number of hours out there doing extra patrol and being, you know, having that visibility and visiting with our citizens and trying to foster good relationships with them and crime prevention matters and things like that. And so I feel that we're very effective that way. Again, you know, when I was asked the day of the incident on the scene, you know, did I feel like there was any risk to the public safety in the city of Casselton? My answer was no, I did not, and I feel like we had everyone detained at that time. And so the two incidents that we've had in relation to these self-defense issues that you've asked me about have been isolated incidents. That doesn't make them better or anything like that, so don't take it as that. But they're isolated to people knowing each other and not just random acts of violence, so to speak. That would be obviously very much more concerning to us if people were just conducting random acts of violence. So in some of the stuff that I've ran here, there's no indication that we're seeing any sort of a spike in violent crimes in Casselton. Actually, 2019 was our higher number, and in 2020 and 21 they went down. So I don't see any trends that way or anything, and certainly want to make sure that we mention that I really honestly truly believe that Casselton is a very safe city to live in, and you know, that there wouldn't be any extra concerns or anything. But again, given that information, if anyone has a situation or, you know, they think something might be going that direction, to make sure that they contact us so we can help them through that.
Obviously, domestic violence is a very complex issue with very many variables in it. And I don't want to make it sound like we're blaming the victim or anything like that, but for people who are struggling with domestic violence, what advice would you give them in a situation like this?
Well, as you know, April, a lot of domestic violence situations can and are different. There's different circumstances with a lot of them. I guess in general, if someone feels like they're in any sort of an abusive relationship, we would want them to try to get out of that relationship if they could, you know, if it was to that point, but certainly, if nothing else, try to seek assistance in that relationship. We don't, you know, staying or remaining in an abusive relationship is not a good situation. And typically what we see is that when people are in those types of relationships, things seem to escalate over time if people don't get help or try to rectify the situation. So my advice would be is if someone finds themselves in that type of a situation, to immediately try to seek help. And if they can help the relationship, you know, leave that relationship, because we don't want anyone to get hurt. Anything going forward from that or outside of that, I guess, would be, like we had mentioned already, if someone felt like they were going down a road and they were having a hard time getting out of a relationship, or felt like as they were trying to get out, they were maybe in more danger, and that happens sometimes, as you know, then we would want them to contact law enforcement so we can assist them in that effort. Because again, we don't want anyone to get hurt. So. Any other questions? All right. Last, in closing, I'd just like to say thanks to our staff. They did a really great job in putting this case together and continuing to put the case together. And certainly appreciate our partnership with the Cass County Coroner's Office and the Cass County State's Attorney's Office, who we contact a number of different times and in situations like this to get some advice on different things. And then also the Fargo Police Department. We needed to utilize a few pieces of their equipment and a few of their staff to operate that equipment. As you guys know, we're really good in this area in sharing resources, and not everyone has the same resources and same equipment. And so they had a few pieces of equipment that we don't have here that we'll look to potentially get in the future to assist our investigations. But they volunteered a few individuals to come out and help run that equipment. So we're grateful for their partnership as well. So. All right, thank you guys.
Thank